Um, this might be a very tricky question to ask. What do you think is the most challenging part of your job, and also the most exciting part of your job?
The most exciting bit is probably when people bring in documents and I get a phone call upstairs saying, "There's a gentleman downstairs with some documents, will you come down and have a look?" And run downstairs to see what it is, and sometimes it's last year's council minutes, which is useful but not that exciting. But sometimes it's a bundle of documents that hasn't been opened for 100 years. It's still tied up in its red tape. You can see where the dust has settled around the edges of the red tape. So you know nobody's looked at these for 100 years. And you open it up and it's a bundle of title deeds, and that's very nice, very interesting, useful for local history. Maybe not hugely exciting. Then you open up one of them and you find it's got this wonderful coloured map of the estate, or a plan of a house or something like that, and you think, nobody's seen this map for maybe 100 years, and now we're going to be able to make it available. We'll perhaps include a copy of it in our Friends Organisation newsletter, so that's really exciting. And then it's also really good when members of the public come in and perhaps they've never used a record office before and they may be quite apprehensive, and we have to do our best to set them at ease, and by the end of the day maybe they found something and they say, "I've been looking for that for 10 years, and you think that you've really achieved something there, that you've helped them find what they're looking for. Sometimes it's something of general interest, sometimes they've been looking for something really personal, sometimes we've been able to help reunite people with long-lost relatives, and that's really exciting and satisfying. And it's really good when they get back to us and tell us that that has actually happened. The most challenging part is probably dealing with the large accumulations of records where one's having to work out what is worth keeping, because there are some collections where you know that you want to keep most of it. If you have a collection of records of a parish council, say, you know you want to keep all of the minute books and so on, title deeds, the files on important subjects. But when it comes to something like maybe a business archive, I remember one firm that we went out to, which was a building firm. It had been established about 50 years. They had a whole warehouse of documents. Now, there's no way we could have taken the entire archive. We'd have needed to double the size of our strong rooms nearly just to take in that one archive. So we had to select, and we had to decide, do we keep a few files about projects in their entirety so that that gives a really good idea of certain particular projects, or do we try and keep a little bit of information about each project? And if we're keeping records about just a few projects, do we keep what might be regarded as typical projects, because those give a good insight into the history of that company, or do we keep the files about really major projects that they dealt with, because those are the buildings that perhaps people are most likely to research in the future? So what we're doing is trying to guess what records might be used for, and that's quite difficult because they might be used for all sorts of different things, often not the purposes for which they were originally produced, and possibly not the purposes we would guess at nowadays. So we have to try and think about what researchers both now and in the future might be interested in, and what documents it's worth keeping to help them with that research.
I think the last proper question is a tradition we have in the blog. As you said, you had an interest for history, therefore.
If you had a time machine, what period or year would you like to go back to and kind of see how it was going?
Well, yes, that's a difficult one, and it probably depends upon whether I've got a return ticket in my time machine. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't go back to anywhere before anaesthetics and penicillin, would you? But there are a lot of periods that I would be interested in going back to for at least a quick visit. And certainly from my own local history, I'd be interested in going back to the village that I've been doing research into, which disappeared in 1538 when Henry VIII built a palace on the site.
Wow.
So to go back and to see what that village looked like, to see the medieval church, of which I've only seen the odd a piece of stone and a tile, because that was the sort of thing which was found when the site was excavated about 50 years ago. So to see that village and then perhaps to see the palace going up on the site would be very interesting. And thinking about some of the collections that I've catalogued here, I've worked on one of the larger estate archives in the northeast of the county. And today the house on the site is a 1960s, 70s house, incorporating the cellars of the old building. But there's been several earlier houses on that site and gardens, and it would be nice to go back and see some of those houses, and of course to meet some of the family members whose correspondence or diaries I've catalogued. Some of them have certainly been quite interesting people, I think, and to have the chance to speak to them would have been good.
That would be probably very interesting. I think it's funny trying to think, what will you do with such a thing like a time machine? Do you think having a time machine will make archives more easy to research, maybe? I don't know. Because I guess with that you could go back to the exact moment in which, the document was produced.
And we could perhaps go back to the moment somewhere in about the 1970s when somebody decided to leave a lot of the Lymington parish records on the vicar's doorstep. And he thought they were rubbish and put them in the dustbin, which was duly collected, and it was only afterwards that this was discovered, and I think the Record Office paid for a JCB, and the local history society went and operated it and dug most of them out of the corporation tip at Lymington. And for records that spent a few days on the corporation tip, they aren't in too bad condition, really. But it would have been better if they hadn't been. And then there are an awful lot of records which just haven't survived or which have been cut up. A number of our collections of wills were wrapped up in cut up bits of medieval manuscripts, and it would be nice to go back and salvage those as well. Maybe to go into the cathedral during the Civil War and stop the Cromwellian soldiers cutting some of the documents up to make kites and throwing them into the river so that they had to be fished out a mile or two down the river at St Cross. It would have been better if that hadn't happened by and large. So there would be quite a lot that archivists would like to nip back and rescue, certainly.
That would be, I guess, that would be a great contribution to archives and history in general. Well, do you have any last thoughts or message you want to send to the camera there, or the world? People that might read this, maybe?
Well, I enjoy being an archivist very much. It's a great privilege to work with documents and with the people who've produced these documents or their descendants who are bringing them in for us to look at. We're open 6 days a week, and I hope people will want to come in and have a look at some of the things that we hold, and maybe think about careers in this area themselves. And next time you're visiting elderly relatives who are saying, I really must clear out that cupboard, just see what's in the cupboard before it gets cleared out, because we're all mostly pleased to be asked about documents which are at risk, and even if they aren't Hampshire documents, we may well be able to advise on a suitable place for them to go to.
That's great. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.